everyone, and welcome to this special Masterclass Explainer. I'm your educator, Divya Saini, and today we are tackling one of the absolute most fascinating and, let's be real, highly testable areas of your history curriculum. We're looking squarely at topic 3.1, the romantic imagination and national feeling. Now, I know how it goes. You're flipping through your textbooks, swimming in intricate dates, and then your eyes land on that infamous box 1 about the Grimm brothers, and you think, wait, is this actually going to be on the exam? The answer is a massive, resounding yes. So, grab your notebooks because today we're going to conquer these concepts together and make sure you have the exact vocabulary and historical evidence you need to absolutely crush those top marks. So, here's our game plan for today's explainer. We'll start with Section 1, the romantic imagination. Then, Section 2, Herder and Das Volk. Section 3, the Grimm brothers. Section 4, Poland's language rebellion. And finally, Section 5, acing your exam questions. Let's just dive right in. All right, Section 1, the romantic imagination. You know, when we study the making of nationalism in Europe, it is just so easy to get caught up in memorizing wars and territorial expansions and treaties. But for this topic, I want you to completely forget about borders and armies for a second. Instead, we need to shift our entire perspective to culture. Let's unpack this textbook definition, and please lock this directly into your memory for those short answer questions. Romanticism was a cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalist sentiment. Their ultimate goal? It was to create a sense of a shared collective heritage and a common cultural past. They wanted people to feel deep down that this shared past was the true foundation of a nation, long before anyone ever drew a political boundary on a map. Now, examiners absolutely love to test your understanding of what the Romantics were rebelling against. It's a classic differentiator. Notice the direct contrast here. Romantic artists and poets generally strongly criticized the glorification of reason and science. Instead, they flipped the script and focused entirely on emotions, intuition, and mystical feelings. They basically believed that the clinical, scientific approach of the Enlightenment just couldn't capture the true beating heart of a nation. To unite a people, you didn't speak to their logic, you had to speak to their souls. And Eugene Delacroix's 1824 painting, The Massacre at Chios, brilliantly illustrates that exact point. Delacroix, a French Romantic painter, is depicting this horrific incident where 20,000 Greeks were said to have been killed by Turks. But think about his method here. He doesn't just hand you a map or a dry list of casualties. He dramatizes the whole incident. He uses vivid, striking colors and focuses intensely on the suffering of women and children. He is very intentionally appealing to the raw emotions of the spectators to create deep sympathy and ultimately nationalist support for the Greeks. That right there, that is Romanticism in action. Moving right along to Section 2, Herder and Das Volk. So transitioning from French art to German philosophy, we hit our first major historical case study in this cultural movement, Johann Gottfried Herder. If you're staring at a multiple choice question or a fill-in-the-blank asking who claimed that true culture lived among the common people, Herder is your guy. He actively pushed back against this old idea that culture was just something fancy aristocrats and palaces possessed. The absolutely crucial point here is nailing his specific terminology. Herder called the common people Das Volk, and he argued very emphatically that it was through their folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances that the true spirit of the nation, which he called the Volksgeist, was popularized. For Herder, wandering around, collecting and recording these local forms of folk culture wasn't just some fun weekend hobby. It was an essential, deeply political project of nation building. Which brings us to Section 3, Box 1, the Grimm brothers. Ah, the famous Box 1. This is the textbook insert that consistently makes students pause and go, wait, what does this have to do with European history? Let's frame this entirely around your exam prep. Why on earth are the guys who wrote Cinderella and Hansel and Gretel sitting right smack in the middle of a chapter about the rise of nationalism? What exactly does the examiner want you to extract from their story? Well, let's trace the timeline of their lives to figure it out. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm literally spent 6 years traveling from village to village, talking to everyday people, and writing down fairy tales that had only ever been handed down orally through generations. They published their first collection in 1812. But, and this is key, they didn't stop at children's stories. They became incredibly active in liberal politics, fighting for freedom of the press, and they even published a massive 33-volume dictionary of the German language. They were serious intellectuals on a serious mission. Okay, grab your pens because this right here is your definitive 3-mark exam answer. If you get a question evaluating the role of the Grimm brothers in nation building, these are the exact 3 bullet points you need. First, they saw French domination as a direct threat to German culture, and they opposed it. Second, they truly believed these collected folktales were expressions of a pure, authentic German spirit. Notice how that ties right back to Herder's idea of Volksgeist? And third, and honestly most importantly, they used vernacular language and folklore to carry modern nationalist messages to huge audiences who were mostly illiterate. It was genius. Next up, Section 4, Poland's Language Rebellion. So, we've seen how culture helped build a nation in Germany. Now let's look at how culture keeps a nation alive, even when its physical borders are completely erased from the map. At the end of the 18th century, Poland was partitioned by the great powers, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Poof! Poland no longer existed as an independent territory. But national feelings were kept vibrantly alive through music and language. Karol Krupinski is a prime example you'll want to cite. He celebrated the Polish national struggle through his operas and music. He famously took traditional folk dances, like the Polonaise and the mazurka, and elevated them into powerful, undeniable nationalist symbols. But of course, this cultural suppression quickly escalated into direct conflict. Following the partition, during the Russian occupation, the Polish language was aggressively forced out of schools, and the Russian language was heavily imposed everywhere. As you can guess, the Polish people didn't just accept this quietly. In 1831, a full-armed rebellion against Russian rule took place, but tragically, it was ultimately crushed by military force. However, the resistance didn't end. It just changed form. Following that crushed rebellion, members of the clergy in Poland began to use language as a literal weapon of national resistance. They stubbornly used Polish for church gatherings and all religious instruction. And the stakes were incredibly high here. The Russian authorities were so threatened by this cultural defiance that a large number of priests and bishops were put in jail or literally exiled to the harsh, freezing landscape of Siberia. Why? Simply as punishment for their refusal to preach in Russian. The use of the Polish language itself became the ultimate symbol of the struggle against Russian dominance. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Acing Your Exam Questions. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from French paintings to German fairy tales to Polish priests. Let's bring all of this together to finalize your review. If you get a long-form essay question asking you to choose 3 examples to show the contribution of culture to the growth of nationalism in Europe, this is your golden outline. We've got 3 main pillars. Pillar 1, folklore. That's where you write about Herder's Das Volk and the Grimm brothers. Pillar 2, language. Detail the Polish clergy's brave resistance against Russian imposition. And Pillar 3, music and dance. Discuss Krupinski turning the Polonaise and mazurka into nationalist symbols. Memorize this exact structure, and you will construct a flawless essay. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you continue your studies. When we look at how nations are truly forged in the hearts of their people, we kind of have to ask ourselves, which proved to be the more resilient weapon in the fight for a nation? The power of an army, which can be easily defeated on a battlefield, or the power of a folktale, a language, and a shared culture, which somehow survives even when the map is entirely rewritten? Thank you so much for joining me in